Sophia had never imagined that a single mistake could change the course of her life. At 26, she worked as a waitress at one of the city's most prestigious luxury hotels, where elegance and perfection were expected every single day. Her salary barely covered the rent for her small apartment and helped pay for her mother's medical bills. Yet she never complained. Instead, she greeted every guest with genuine warmth, believing that kindness was never wasted. Even if life often seemed unfair, her colleagues admired her quiet strength, her willingness to help without expecting anything in return, and the calm smile she managed to wear through every challenge. To them, Sophia was proof that true dignity had nothing to do with wealth or status. On the evening of the Romano family's extravagant wedding celebration, the hotel was transformed into a breathtaking masterpiece. Crystal chandeliers illuminated a ballroom decorated with thousands of imported white roses and orchids flown in from Europe. Luxury cars lined the entrance while elegantly dressed guests, including influential politicians, famous actors, successful entrepreneurs, and members of wealthy families filled the venue with laughter and conversation. Every detail reflected unimaginable wealth and flawless sophistication, creating a world that seemed completely separate from Sophia's modest life behind the service doors. The center of attention was the bride, Victoria, stunning in an exquisite designer gown adorned with diamonds. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she deserved admiration from everyone around her. Beneath her polished smile, however, was a cruel arrogance. Victoria measured people by their appearance, their clothing, and the size of their bank accounts. She enjoyed reminding others of her social position and rarely missed an opportunity to embarrass anyone she considered beneath her. To her, wealth defined a person's worth, and those without it deserved little more than polite indifference. As the reception prepared to begin, an exhausted event coordinator accidentally confused Sophia with one of the distinguished guests whose name had been misplaced on the seating chart. Before anyone noticed the error, Sophia was politely escorted to the head table, directly beside the bride and groom. The entire ballroom seemed to freeze. Conversations stopped. Curious whispers spread from table to table as hundreds of eyes turned toward the young waitress sitting among society's elite. Some guests exchanged amused smiles. Others stared in disbelief, and a few quietly laughed, assuming she had intentionally taken a seat that did not belong to her. Victoria's expression darkened the moment she noticed Sophia. Instead of allowing the mistake to be corrected discreetly, she decided to turn it into public entertainment. With a mocking smile, she loudly questioned whether the hotel had started promoting waitresses to honored guests. She glanced at Sophia's simple uniform and remarked that it clashed terribly with the elegance of the ballroom. She ridiculed her profession, suggested that someone from such a humble background could never understand fine dining, and sarcastically offered to explain which fork to use before she embarrassed herself further. Every comment drew uncomfortable laughter from a handful of guests eager to impress the bride, while many others remained silent, avoiding eye contact but doing nothing to stop the humiliation. The insults continued throughout the evening. Victoria criticized Sophia's appearance, mocked the simplicity of her hairstyle, questioned her education, and repeatedly implied that people like her did not belong in a room filled with successful and influential individuals. Each cruel remark was carefully delivered to ensure everyone nearby could hear it. The ballroom that had moments earlier celebrated love slowly became a stage for humiliation, where one woman's pride depended on making another feel insignificant. Sophia felt every word like a sharp wound. Yet she refused to answer cruelty with anger. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she kept her voice steady and her posture composed. Rather than arguing or defending herself, she quietly apologized for the seating mistake, even though it was entirely beyond her control. She lowered her eyes not because she believed Victoria's insults, but because she refused to let bitterness steal the kindness that had always defined her. In that moment, while many guests judged her by her modest uniform, None of them realized they were witnessing a far greater measure of character. Sophia left the head table with grace instead of resentment, unaware that this painful evening would become the beginning of a remarkable story that would soon change every life in the room. Although every instinct told her to leave the ballroom and never look back, Sophia refused to let humiliation define her evening. After quietly excusing herself from the head table, she returned to the service area, straightened her uniform, took a slow breath, and resumed her duties as if nothing had happened. Her hands still trembled slightly from the embarrassment, but her professionalism never faltered. She continued carrying silver trays through the crowded ballroom, refilling glasses before they were empty. Serving each course with the same warm smile she offered every guest, regardless of whether they had ignored her suffering or laughed at her expense. Several co-workers urged her to take a break, worried that the bride's cruel remarks had been too much to bear. But Sophia simply thanked them for their concern and insisted that the evening was not about her. Hundreds of guests had come to celebrate a wedding, and she would not allow her personal pain to interfere with their experience. As the reception continued, opportunities to help others appeared one after another, and Sophia responded to each without hesitation. When a little boy chasing balloons slipped on the polished marble floor and burst into tears, she gently lifted him into her arms, cleaned the scrape on his knee, and distracted him with a folded napkin shaped like a swan until he smiled again. Lauder? An elderly woman became anxious after realizing she had misplaced her heart medication. While other staff members were busy serving dinner, Sophia calmly searched the lounge, eventually finding the small pill case beneath a chair and returning it before the woman suffered any distress. During the first dance, one of the bridesmaids accidentally stepped on Victoria's long veil, loosening part of the gown just moments before photographers gathered for family portraits. Despite everything that had happened, Sophia quietly approached, repaired the fastening with remarkable skill, and slipped away before anyone noticed who had helped. Not long afterward, panic spread through a nearby table when an elderly guest suddenly began choking on a piece of steak. Without waiting for instructions, Sophia rushed forward, remained composed under pressure, and successfully performed first aid until the guest could breathe again. The ballroom erupted in relieved applause. Yet she accepted no praise, returning to her duties as though saving someone's life was simply another responsibility. Sophia's quiet acts of compassion only fueled Victoria's frustration. The bride had expected tears, anger, or perhaps a dramatic confrontation that would justify her own behavior. Instead, Sophia answered every insult with grace, making Victoria appear increasingly petty before the guests. Unable to tolerate being overshadowed by someone she considered socially inferior, Victoria searched for new ways to humiliate her. While Sophia poured champagne for the bridal party, Victoria deliberately brushed her arm, causing sparkling wine to spill across the white tablecloth. She immediately accused Sophia of being careless and demanded a public apology, even though several nearby guests had clearly witnessed what happened. No one spoke up. Sophia simply apologized for the inconvenience, replaced the stained linens, and continued working without a single word of protest. The calmness in her voice only intensified Victoria's irritation. Determined to regain everyone's attention, Victoria later took the microphone under the pretense of thanking the hotel staff. Instead, she turned the moment into another opportunity for ridicule. With exaggerated politeness, she joked that perhaps the hotel should begin offering etiquette lessons to its waitresses before allowing them near distinguished guests. Laughter echoed from a few corners of the ballroom. While many others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, Sophia lowered her eyes for a brief moment, then continued serving dessert as though the speech had never been directed at her. Her silence was not weakness. It was a quiet refusal to allow another person's cruelty to dictate her own behavior. Among the hundreds of guests, one man had been watching the evening unfold with growing fascination. Alessandro Romano, a respected businessman and distant relative of the groom, had initially paid little attention to the young waitress caught in the seating mishap. At first, she was simply another employee doing her job. Yet as the night progressed, he found himself observing her more closely. He noticed that she never sought sympathy or attempted to defend herself. She accepted criticism with remarkable composure, treated every guest with equal respect, and continued helping others despite the embarrassment she had endured. There was no bitterness in her expression, no hidden ambition behind her kindness, and no trace of self-pity. Everything about her felt genuine, and that authenticity stood in striking contrast to the carefully polished appearances surrounding her. Curious, Alessandro quietly approached several members of the hotel staff during a break in the reception. One waitress smiled warmly when Sophia's name was mentioned. She explained that Sophia was always the first person to volunteer for difficult shifts, and the last to leave when someone needed assistance. A senior manager added that in all the years Sophia had worked at the hotel, he had never once heard her complain. Even after exhausting double shifts or difficult customers, another employee recalled how she regularly spent her own lunch breaks comforting new staff members who felt overwhelmed on their first day. To everyone who knew her, kindness was not something Sophia performed when people were watching. It was simply the way she lived. The more Alessandro learned, the stronger a strange feeling grew inside him. Something about Sophia seemed unexpectedly familiar. It wasn't merely her gentle voice or her calm demeanor. There was a distant memory he couldn't quite grasp, like the outline of a forgotten face hidden beneath years of time. Several times throughout the evening, he caught himself looking in her direction, convinced he had seen her somewhere before. Yet no matter how hard he searched his memory, the answer remained frustratingly out of reach. He could not explain the feeling, but he knew with absolute certainty that the story of the quiet waitress was far more extraordinary than anyone in that ballroom could possibly imagine. Long after the music had faded and the last guests had departed, Sophia's quiet resilience continued to occupy Alessandro Romano's thoughts. He had attended countless glamorous events where appearances often concealed selfishness. Yet the young waitress he had watched that evening possessed a sincerity that was impossible to ignore. Her kindness had never seemed calculated, and her calm dignity in the face of relentless humiliation left an impression that refused to disappear. As he drove home through the silent streets, a persistent feeling lingered in the back of his mind. There was something strangely familiar about her, something beyond her gentle smile or composed manner. It was a memory buried so deeply that he could almost reach it but never quite grasp it. Unable to dismiss the feeling, Alessandro decided he needed answers. The following morning, he returned to the hotel under the simple pretense of thanking the staff for their excellent service. Instead, he quietly began asking questions about Sophia. The restaurant manager spoke highly of her without hesitation, describing her as one of the most dependable employees the hotel had ever hired. She had worked there for several years, rarely took a day off, and was known for volunteering whenever another employee faced an emergency. Coworkers echoed the same admiration, recalling countless occasions when Sophia stayed late to help others finish their shifts or used her own savings to support struggling colleagues without expecting repayment. Alessandro requested permission to review the basic employment records available to management, explaining that he wished to recommend her for a charitable foundation sponsored by his family's company. The documents revealed only simple details, yet several of them immediately caught his attention. Sophia had grown up in the same coastal city where his family once lived. The year she relocated to the capital matched a date that stirred an old memory. Even more intriguing was a medical leave recorded several years earlier following treatment for severe burns and smoke inhalation. According to the file, she had been hospitalized for nearly 3 weeks before quietly returning to work. Alessandro stared at the dates in silence. They aligned almost perfectly with an event his family had never forgotten: a devastating car accident that nearly claimed the life of his younger sister, Isabella. For years, that tragedy had haunted every member of the Romano family. Isabella had been only 12 years old when the family car collided with a truck on a rain-soaked highway. The impact forced the vehicle into a roadside barrier before the engine caught fire. Traffic came to a standstill as terrified drivers climbed out of their cars, watching thick black smoke rise into the sky. Some called emergency services. Others shouted helplessly from a distance, afraid that the fuel tank would explode at any moment. Flames spread rapidly through the front of the vehicle, while Isabella remained trapped inside, unconscious and unable to free herself. The situation seemed hopeless. Every passing second brought the fire closer to consuming the entire car. Then, without hesitation, a young woman emerged from the crowd. Ignoring desperate warnings from bystanders, she ran toward the burning vehicle. Heat radiated through the air with such intensity that several people instinctively stepped backward. But she continued forward without slowing, shielding her face with her jacket. She forced open the damaged passenger door, crawled through broken glass and thick smoke, and struggled to reach the frightened child trapped inside. The flames scorched her arms while shattered metal tore through her hands. Yet she refused to retreat, using every ounce of strength she possessed. She freed Isabella from the twisted seatbelt and carried the unconscious girl away just moments before the engine erupted in a violent explosion. The blast threw the rescuer to the ground, leaving her with painful burns and multiple injuries. Even so, her first concern was whether the little girl was still breathing. As ambulances arrived, paramedics rushed Isabella to the nearest hospital in critical condition. The young woman who had saved her quietly accepted treatment for her own injuries, but declined to provide more than the basic information required for medical records. When reporters flooded the emergency department after learning that the daughter of the influential Romano family had survived a miraculous rescue, they searched tirelessly for the anonymous hero. Hospital staff knew only that she had refused interviews and insisted she had done nothing extraordinary. Before the media could identify her, she checked herself out of the hospital, disappeared without leaving a forwarding address, and returned to her ordinary life. Despite the Romano family's public appeals and substantial reward offers, no one ever came forward to claim recognition. The mysterious rescuer became little more than a cherished memory and an unanswered question that lingered within the family for years. Now, as Alessandro compared the old accident reports with Sophia's employment records, the similarities became impossible to ignore. Still unwilling to rely on coincidence alone, he contacted the police officer who had supervised the investigation. Although many years had passed, archived reports remained available. The officer remembered the extraordinary bravery of the unidentified woman who had entered the burning car after everyone else had retreated. Hospital records confirmed that an unnamed female patient had been admitted that same evening with severe burns consistent with exposure to an intense vehicle fire. Alessandro then requested access to the original traffic camera footage preserved in the city's archives. The video quality was poor, but one frame froze his heart. Through smoke and flashing emergency lights, the young woman carrying Isabella away from the burning wreck turned briefly toward the camera. Though younger and dressed differently, the gentle determination in her eyes was unmistakable. It was Sophia. To remove every remaining doubt, Alessandro visited the physician who had treated both patients that night. The retired doctor immediately remembered the remarkable young woman who repeatedly asked about the child's condition instead of her own injuries. He recalled how she had declined financial assistance, rejected every offer of public recognition, and quietly slipped away before dawn because she believed saving a life should never become a transaction. The doctor's testimony matched every document, every report, and every forgotten memory. There could no longer be any question. The anonymous heroine his family had spent years searching for was the very waitress who had endured humiliation at the wedding with extraordinary grace. The realization struck Alessandro with overwhelming force. Images from the previous evening replayed relentlessly in his mind: Victoria's cruel laughter, the guests' mocking whispers, Sophia's quiet apology for a mistake she had never made, and his own silence while everything unfolded. Shame settled heavily upon him. the woman who had risked her life to save his little sister, expecting nothing in return, had been insulted and degraded in front of hundreds of people while he stood only a few steps away. She had never revealed her identity, never reminded anyone of her sacrifice, and never used her heroism to gain sympathy or privilege. Instead, she had chosen humility over recognition and compassion over resentment. At that moment, Alessandro understood that true greatness was often hidden beneath the simplest appearance. He also realized that the injustice Sophia had suffered could no longer remain unanswered. The truth had been buried for years. But now that he had uncovered it, he was determined to make sure the entire world would finally see the extraordinary woman they had so carelessly judged. The following evening, the wedding reception was still in full swing. Laughter echoed beneath the glittering crystal chandeliers as the orchestra played elegant melodies and guests toasted the newly married couple with expensive champagne. To everyone in the ballroom, the celebration appeared flawless. No one suspected that within a few minutes, the atmosphere would change so dramatically that the event would be remembered for generations not as a magnificent wedding, but as the night an extraordinary truth finally came to light. Just as the master of ceremonies prepared to introduce the next part of the evening's program, Alessandro Romano rose quietly from his seat. His calm expression immediately drew attention. As a respected businessman whose family name carried enormous influence, Alessandro rarely interrupted formal occasions without good reason. He walked confidently toward the stage and politely requested the microphone from the host. A puzzled silence spread across the ballroom. Conversations gradually faded as hundreds of curious eyes followed his every movement. Even the musicians stopped playing. Sensing that something significant was about to happen, "I apologize for interrupting this celebration." Alessandro began in a composed but solemn voice. "However, there is something far more important than tonight's schedule. There is a debt of gratitude that has remained unpaid for many years, and I can no longer remain silent." Guests exchanged confused glances. Some assumed he intended to announce a charitable donation or congratulate the newlyweds. Others simply waited with polite curiosity. Victoria, seated proudly beside the groom, forced a pleasant smile. Though the interruption clearly irritated her, she had spent months planning every detail of the reception, and she disliked anything that shifted attention away from herself. Instead of speaking about the wedding, Alessandro began telling a story from years earlier. He described a rainy afternoon when a terrible collision had trapped a 12-year-old girl inside a burning car. He spoke about frightened drivers standing helplessly on the roadside, watching flames consume the vehicle while emergency services struggled to reach the scene in time. He recalled the desperate cries of a family who believed they were about to lose someone they loved forever. His voice remained steady, but the emotion behind every word filled the ballroom with an uneasy silence. Many guests listened respectfully, though few understood why he had chosen such a painful memory during a wedding reception. Victoria's patience quickly faded. She glanced repeatedly at the wedding planner before finally rolling her eyes. "What does this have to do with tonight?" she muttered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "We're here to celebrate a marriage, not listen to old stories." Alessandro ignored the interruption and continued. He explained that while everyone else feared the exploding vehicle, one young woman had run toward the fire without considering the danger to herself. She climbed through smoke and shattered glass, rescued the trapped child moments before the car exploded, and suffered serious injuries in the process. Yet after saving a life, she quietly disappeared without accepting money, publicity, or even a simple thank you. His voice softened as he admitted that the Romano family had searched for this courageous stranger for years, hoping to express the gratitude they believed they owed her. But now, the ballroom had become completely silent. Every guest was listening. Even Victoria stopped speaking, though impatience remained visible on her face. Then Alessandro slowly turned away from the audience. His eyes rested on Sophia, who was quietly collecting empty glasses near the back of the room. completely unaware that every person in the ballroom was about to learn the truth. He raised one hand toward her. "The woman who saved my little sister's life," he said clearly, "is standing in this room tonight." Sophia froze. She looked around in confusion, believing he must be referring to someone else. Alessandro smiled gently before speaking the words that changed everything. "Her name is Sophia." For several long seconds, absolute silence filled the ballroom. No one moved. No one spoke. The guests stared first at Alessandro, then at the young waitress they had ignored or worse, mocked only hours earlier. Victoria's confident smile disappeared instantly. "That's impossible," she said, forcing a laugh. "There must be some mistake." Without raising his voice, Alessandro nodded toward the large projection screen behind the stage. "I expected people might have doubts," he replied calmly. "That's why I brought proof." The lights dimmed. A series of photographs appeared on the screen. First came images taken by emergency responders at the accident scene years earlier. Flames surrounded the destroyed vehicle while paramedics rushed toward the survivors. Next came traffic camera footage, showing a young woman carrying an unconscious child away from the burning wreckage only moments before the explosion. Though the video was grainy, the woman's face became unmistakably clear as the footage paused on a single frame. It was Sophia. A murmur swept through the ballroom. The presentation continued. Hospital admission records documented severe burns and smoke inhalation suffered by the unidentified rescuer. Police reports confirmed eyewitness accounts describing the extraordinary bravery of a young woman who refused to leave the child behind. Finally, Alessandro displayed a signed statement from the physician who had treated both patients that day, confirming that the anonymous heroine had declined every reward before quietly disappearing from the hospital. The evidence was overwhelming. No one could dispute it. The room that had once echoed with whispered insults now stood in stunned silence. Victoria's face turned pale, desperate to regain control. She rose from her chair. "This proves nothing," she snapped. "Anyone could misinterpret old records. Besides, if she really did something so heroic, why didn't she tell anyone? Why spend years pretending to be an ordinary waitress?" Her voice grew louder with every sentence. But each attempt to defend herself only revealed more arrogance. "So now we're supposed to believe she's some kind of saint," Victoria continued bitterly. "This is obviously a performance to gain sympathy." The accusation hung awkwardly in the air. No one applauded. No one agreed. Instead, guests began looking at Victoria with the same disbelief they had once directed toward Sophia. An elderly businessman slowly shook his head. A woman seated near the front lowered her eyes in visible embarrassment. Several guests who had laughed at Victoria's earlier jokes exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing they had willingly participated in humiliating someone whose courage far exceeded their own. Anabiwan. People began rising from their seats, not to applaud the bride, but to approach Sophia. The first was the elderly woman whose medication Sophia had found earlier that evening. Tears filled her eyes as she gently took Sophia's hands and whispered, "Please forgive us. We judged you without knowing who you truly were." Soon others followed. Parents whose children Sophia had comforted, guests she had served with kindness despite their indifference. Even those who had remained silent during Victoria's insults now admitted they should have spoken in her defense. Every apology carried the weight of regret. Sophia accepted each one with the same quiet grace she had shown throughout the evening. She never reminded anyone of the pain they had caused or demanded an explanation for their behavior. She simply smiled gently and assured them that holding on to resentment would only create more suffering. Watching her respond with humility after everything she had endured moved many guests to tears. Alessandro then stepped down from the stage and walked slowly toward Sophia. Without hesitation, he bowed his head before her, a gesture so unexpected that the ballroom gasped collectively. "My family has spent years searching for the person who gave my sister a second chance at life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We failed to find you because you never wanted recognition. Yet yesterday, while we should have been honoring you, we allowed you to be humiliated in front of everyone. For that, I offer my deepest apology." At that moment, Alessandro's parents and his younger sister Isabella joined him. Isabella, now a confident young woman, looked at Sophia with tears streaming down her face before embracing her tightly. "I wouldn't be alive without you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me the chance to grow up." The Romano family stood together before Sophia and bowed respectfully in gratitude. The gesture carried far greater meaning than wealth or social status ever could. The applause that followed was unlike any heard during the wedding reception. It was not applause for luxury. It was not applause for power. It was a heartfelt tribute to courage, humility, and the extraordinary strength of a woman whose true worth had finally been seen by everyone in the room. The thunderous applause gradually faded, leaving behind a silence unlike anything the magnificent ballroom had experienced that evening. Only hours earlier, the room had been filled with laughter directed at a young waitress whose only mistake had been sitting in the wrong seat. Now those same guests stood with lowered heads, confronted by the painful realization that they had judged an extraordinary woman solely because of her appearance and profession. The atmosphere had changed completely. The celebration was no longer about wealth, elegance, or social prestige. It had become a lesson in humanity that no one present would ever forget. Standing beside Victoria, the groom remained motionless, his face pale with disbelief. Throughout the reception, he had dismissed his bride's cruel remarks as harmless jokes, convincing himself that she was simply under the stress of planning such a lavish event. But after witnessing Alessandro's revelation and hearing the overwhelming evidence of Sophia's heroism, he could no longer hide behind excuses. For the first time, he saw Victoria exactly as she was, not through the eyes of a man in love, but through the eyes of someone who finally understood the danger of arrogance disguised as confidence. He replayed the evening in his mind. Sophia had never argued, never insulted anyone in return, and never attempted to embarrass Victoria despite every opportunity to do so. She had continued serving guests with kindness even after enduring relentless humiliation. In contrast, Victoria had chosen cruelty over compassion at every turn, delighting in belittling someone who had done nothing wrong. The difference between the two women could not have been more striking. Slowly, the groom stepped away from Victoria. The movement was small, but its meaning was unmistakable. Victoria reached for his arm in confusion. "What are you doing?" she whispered, forcing a nervous smile. "Let's finish the ceremony. Everyone is watching." He looked at her quietly before answering. "They are watching," he replied. And for the first time, Suongi. His voice carried through the silent ballroom. "If you can humiliate an innocent woman in front of hundreds of people simply because you believe she's beneath you, what kind of person will you become when no one is watching? If this is how you treat a stranger, how will you treat your husband, our future children, or anyone who depends on your kindness?" Victoria tried to interrupt, insisting that everyone had misunderstood her intentions. She blamed the pressure of the wedding, accused Alessandro of ruining the celebration, and even suggested that Sophia had manipulated the situation to gain sympathy. Yet every excuse only exposed the same pride and refusal to accept responsibility that had shocked the guests moments earlier. The groom gently removed the wedding ring from his finger. "I cannot build a lifetime with someone who mistakes cruelty for strength," he said calmly. "Marriage requires respect, compassion, and humility. Tonight you've shown me that you value none of those things." With those words, he placed the ring on the table between them. "The wedding is over." A collective gasp swept across the ballroom. No one expected such a dramatic ending. Yet few questioned his decision. The evidence had revealed far more than Sophia's hidden past. It had uncovered Victoria's true character, and that truth could not be ignored. Victoria stood frozen, unable to believe what had happened. The admiration she had spent years cultivating disappeared within minutes. Friends who had once eagerly surrounded her quietly stepped away. Several business associates exchanged uneasy glances, privately wondering whether someone capable of such public cruelty could be trusted in professional partnerships. Even members of her own family struggled to defend her actions. Their disappointment was visible in their silence. Without another word, Victoria looked around the ballroom, hoping to find someone willing to stand beside her. No one did. The room that had once celebrated her beauty and success now offered only uncomfortable silence, with tears of frustration filling her eyes. She gathered the train of her wedding gown and walked slowly toward the exit. No applause followed her departure. No angry confrontation took place. There was only the quiet weight of consequences. She left the ballroom alone, carrying with her the painful realization that pride and prejudice had destroyed what should have been the happiest day of her life. It was not revenge that ended her wedding. It was the inevitable result of the choices she had made off Tomade. As the doors closed behind her, attention returned to Sophia, one after another. Guests approached her with sincere apologies. Some admitted they had laughed because they wanted to fit in. Others confessed they had remained silent, even though they knew Victoria's behavior was wrong. An elderly couple thanked Sophia for reminding them that true nobility is measured by character rather than wealth. Parents introduced their children to her, hoping they would remember the lesson they had witnessed that evening. Every apology reflected genuine remorse, and every conversation carried the hope of becoming better people. Sophia accepted each apology with quiet grace. She never reminded anyone of their mistakes or demanded forgiveness in return. Instead, she simply encouraged them to show greater kindness to the next person who might need it. Her generosity of spirit surprised everyone once again. After enduring humiliation, she still chose understanding over resentment. In that moment, many realized that her greatest act of courage had not been running into a burning car years earlier. It was refusing to let bitterness change the person she had always been. Her colleagues surrounded her with smiles and tearful embraces. Employees who had admired her for years felt proud that the world had finally recognized the remarkable woman they had always known. The hotel manager stepped forward before the assembled guests and publicly acknowledged Sophia's unwavering dedication, honesty, and compassion. He announced that her years of exceptional service had earned her a promotion to guest relations supervisor, a position that reflected not only her professionalism, but also the trust and respect she inspired in everyone around her. The ballroom erupted into applause once again, this time celebrating an achievement built through years of quiet perseverance. When the applause settled, Alessandro approached Sophia with his parents and Isabella beside him. His voice carried both gratitude and humility. "No amount of money can repay what you've given our family," he said. "You saved my sister's life. But tonight you gave all of us something just as valuable. You reminded us that true greatness has nothing to do with privilege or status. It is found in compassion, courage, and the willingness to help others without expecting anything in return." His mother gently took Sophia's hands. "From this day forward," she said warmly, "our family will always consider you one of our own. If you ever need help, guidance, or simply a place where you belong, our door will always be open." Sophia felt tears welling in her eyes. For years, she had believed the rescue was simply something any decent person would have done. She had never imagined that one selfless decision would eventually bring her to this moment. Looking around the ballroom, she realized that the greatest reward had never been recognition or gratitude. It was seeing hearts changed because of the truth. In the weeks that followed, life gradually returned to normal. Though nothing was quite the same, Sophia continued working at the hotel. But now guests greeted her with admiration instead of indifference. Her story spread throughout the city, inspiring countless people who had grown cynical about kindness. Despite the attention, she remained exactly as she had always been: humble, hardworking, and quietly compassionate. Alessandro found himself visiting the hotel more often, though not for business meetings. Sometimes they shared coffee after Sophia's shift ended. Other times they walked through nearby parks discussing books, family, and the dreams they had never spoken aloud to anyone else. Their conversations were effortless, built upon honesty rather than appearances. There were no dramatic declarations of love, no rushed romance born from gratitude or admiration. Instead, a genuine friendship developed naturally, strengthened by mutual respect and shared values. Together, they began volunteering at community charities and organizing fundraising events for burn victims and emergency medical services. Sophia wanted to help others who had experienced the same pain she once had, while Alessandro hoped to honor the courage that had forever changed his family's future. Side by side, they discovered that the strongest relationships are not founded on grand gestures but on countless quiet acts of kindness performed together. As time passed, friendship slowly blossomed into something deeper, not because fate demanded it, but because both of them had learned to recognize genuine goodness when they found it. Their relationship became a testament to patience, trust, and shared purpose, proving that lasting love grows from mutual respect rather than instant attraction. Looking back, those who attended the wedding rarely remembered the luxurious decorations, the expensive gowns, or the extravagant menu. Instead, they remembered the waitress who had been judged for her uniform, yet revealed herself to possess a heart more valuable than anything money could buy. They remembered the bride whose pride cost her everything she valued. Most importantly, they remembered the lesson that transformed them all. A person's true worth is never measured by clothing, social status, or financial success. It is revealed through compassion, integrity, and the choices made when no one expects recognition. Genuine kindness may go unnoticed for years, but it leaves footprints that time can never erase. Arrogance and prejudice may appear powerful for a moment, yet they inevitably destroy what they seek to protect. Compassion, however, has the quiet strength to heal wounded hearts, restore lost hope, and create new beginnings where no one believed they were possible. And for Sophia, the young waitress who had once walked into a ballroom believing she was invisible, that unforgettable evening became the beginning of a life filled not with wealth or fame, but with something far more enduring: the respect she had earned, the family she had found, and a future built upon the very kindness that had always defined her.